So the dog's in place now and at the right size, and we're all happy with that. What we're going to do next is just add a very simple little shadow under his feet, just to plant him on the ground instead of making him look like he's sort of floating around at the moment. And we're going to very simply do that by just adding a black circle with a bit of a blur, and then just play about with the opacity until we're happy. So the first thing we need to do is to create a layer for this shadow, and naturally that wants to be underneath the dog layer. So if I just create a new layer here with the dog layer selected, you can see it creates one above there. We'll double click that and call it dog shadow, and grabbing the layer we'll just drop it down so it's underneath the dog. And what we'll do next is we'll just move our dog for now. We'll just grab the move tool up there. We'll just move him temporarily. We'll just move him down over the white here, just so it's a bit easier to see where we're putting the shadow rather than being over that bar there. And then we'll move the two layers back up together once we're happy with the shadow itself. So selecting the dog shadow layer, we need to change our foreground colour to black, 0, 0, 0. And we're going to grab in the custom shape tool here, or rounded rectangular tool as you may have selected, or rectangle tool. What we want to select next is the ellipse tool here, which is just basically a solid circle. Going up to the top for the tool options, just make sure that the end one here is selected, so it's fill pixels, and of course your ellipse tool should be selected now. Mode normal, opacity 100, and make sure anti-aliasing is switched on, otherwise we'll have jagged edges on our ellipse. So what we're going to do is we're just going to draw an ellipse underneath the dog, approximately the size of its feet, something like that, not too deep, just a thin shape, something like that's probably quite nice. I'll just let go there. As you can see, we've got sort of a cartoon shadow going on under there. If I just grab the move tool again, I can move him more underneath his feet. Just plant him on, so it just looks like he's stood more on the ground now rather than floating in thin air. That's a little bit strong, so what we're going to do is just take the opacity of that down a little bit. So we'll just slide that down until it looks okay. So it's not 100%, we'll say 70%, we'll try 70. Yeah, that looks okay. And at the moment it's just a little bit solid, so what we're going to do is add just a little bit of blur onto that shadow so it's not quite as harsh. And we do that by going to filter up at the top here, blur, and we'll add a Gaussian blur. There are many types of blur, but for this Gaussian blur will work nicely. We'll just click on there. Now at the moment mine is set to 9 pixels, which as you can see is way too much because it's completely blurred out the shadow beyond recognition. What we want is something just to give it a soft edge rather than that sharp edge that it had. Something like 3. Just change that to 3 so we all have the same. I think that's nice. 3. And with the move tool I'm just going to nudge it slightly with my keyboard so it's in a position I'm happy with. Let's say there. So now the dog looks like he's nicely planted on the ground rather than just hovering around. So we're going to move these two layers together now. Now we could either, holding down shift, I could select to the dog layer as well, so we have them both selected and move that around. But knowing that the shadow and the dog pretty much they're always going to be together anyway if we ever decide to move them again, what I'm going to do is just, as we have in the past, use the link layers tool here and just click on there just to create that link. So in future if I just grab another layer and I want to move the dog and the shadow together quickly, I just need to grab one layer and they both will move together. So we'll just position him back up where he was before. Just nudging him slightly so he's down. Now we can see he's now back up there but with the shadow underneath. The next thing is the drop shadow. If I just bring up the final design, you can see it just has a bit of a drop shadow to punch him out of that header, which is nice. I'll minimize that. We'll add that now to our dog by double clicking on the layer to bring up our layer style palette. I'll just drag this over here so we can see the dog. Hit drop shadow, make sure that's all selected. As you can see, that appears there. It's a little bit strong at the moment, so we're gonna take that quite far down, 25%. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so there we have it. We now have the dog on the header with his shadow and drop shadow, and looking pretty nice. So if we move on to the next video, we'll copy him down onto the footer and the rest of the text down there too.